In this video, I'll show you how to write some romantic sounding cinematic music, which could accompany a video of a wedding montage, like this, in 5 easy steps. Over the last 10 years, my top-selling library music tracks have been used to accompany over 1,000 romantic projects. So I'll be writing in a similar style to my top-selling tracks. Firstly, decide which key you want to write in, followed by listing out all of the chords that belong to that key. I'm going to keep it simple for this track and choose the key of C major. Next, set about writing a progression to form the first section or intro. Aim to have a mixture of major and minor chords for some harmonic contrast. Have a go at trying out different combinations of 3 or 4 chords, and remember you can repeat chords as well. Here is what I've come up with. So here I've got C major, chord 1, before moving to F major, chord 4. I then repeat this, returning to C and then F again. For some harmonic variation, I then decided on an A minor chord, chord 6, to F major. Again repeating this, returning to A minor and then F major again. Moving from chord 1 to 4 is of course the same as a plagal cadence, also known as the Amen cadence, which is used extensively in hymns and so frequently sung during wedding services. Here are a couple of varying chord progressions you could try as well. For a romantic piece to accompany wedding memories, we obviously want the music to have a heightened sense of emotion. Emotion in music can be achieved by creating musical tension, and a great way of creating emotional tension can be to include additional notes alongside the primary notes of the triads. Some of my favourite additions, especially for striking a romantic tone, are the intervals of major sevenths and ninths. Here's a major seventh interval added to an F major chord, an E. And now here's a ninth interval added, so the notes of F, A and C, plus a G, the ninth, 9 diatonic notes above F. So go through and experiment with adding a few major sevenths or ninths to say half of the chords in your progression. You'll probably want to avoid major sevenths within any minor chords though, as these are particularly dissonant. So now you've got your initial progression. Let's set about using the chords to help write a piano part, full of motion, to help set the energy and excitement that you'd probably want to accompany some happy wedding memories. At this stage, you may want to consider the time signature that your piece will be in as well. You could of course stick to 4/4, although I've chosen 3/4 or 3/4 notes per measure to hopefully give a playful, even dance-like feel, especially at a quicker tempo of nearly 140 beats per minute. Think of this as an accompanying piano part. You don't necessarily need to write a melody yet, so you can stick to just using the notes from each chord of your progression. Here my first chord is C major or chord 1, so I'm just using the notes of C, E and G. It's a fairly energetic part, made up of 8th notes or quavers, with the root note of C on the bottom, followed by a repeating pattern of G, and then E and C together, followed by the G below. This pattern then fills the rest of the bar, before then repeating the whole of the first bar another 3 times. You might want to consider using the sustain pedal in your piano part as well. Here you can see that I have CC64 or sustain data added. Just make sure to program some small moments where the sustain pedal is released in order to reset and avoid having the notes from multiple chords blend together, which can sound really muddy. For your second chord, you can then easily repeat the same pattern, but changing the notes to reflect your new chord. You can also see that for mine, by having an F9 chord, it's also enabled the top G from the initial piano pattern to remain, adding a degree of cohesiveness between the 2 chords. So with this fast tempo and 3/4 meter, these 2 chords, which I'm simply going to copy and paste the previous part into bar 9, have resulted in 16 bars of music, forming the first part of my introduction. You can see that I've used a lot of repetition. Essentially the rhythm and general pattern of the notes is the same for each bar, just changing the pitches to reflect each chord. So for the next part of the introduction, which I've labelled as Intro Part 2, I've opted to use the chord of Am7 or chord 6, which I chose earlier. As I started off the piece with two major chords, by moving to A minor, it helps to create some needed contrast or emotion. So for the piano part, you can keep to a similar pattern of notes as before, just making sure to change the pitches to reflect your new chord. I'm going to then move back to F major, but with the added major 7th interval, the pitch of E, for some extra emotional musical tension. I'm then going to again copy and paste the previous two chords, but with some rhythmic variation at the end, by bringing the rhythm to a halt during the F major chord. During these last 16 bars, I've also added a melodic element to the right-hand piano part, with these ascending and descending figures at the end of every 4 bars. So let's take a listen to the complete introduction. The piano I've been using is the C7 from Keyscape by Spectrasonics. So by now, you should have a short piece of piano music that is either 16 or 32 measures long. Once you have the intro, let's set about extending the piece by taking the structure and chord progressions of the previous 2 sections and repeating them, but now working on some further development. As you saw in the previous section, I briefly introduced a melodic part into the second half of the intro in the right hand of the piano part. I'm planning for my next section, my main A section, to be the main opportunity for playing a melody. So firstly, copy the chord progression from your previous intro. As I want to write an A section, the 2 parts of the previous intro will become my A and B sections. Once you've copied the chords, feel free to tweak elements such as the chord extensions here and there for some variety. I've also opted to change the last chord to a G suspended 4, resolving to G major, at the end of these next 32 bars. So here is an example of a melody which could work in this context. Notice how there is movement by step. Consecutive notes which are either a whole step or half step apart, along with some movement by leaps added for variety. For your own melody, try to also include a single highest note, as I have here with the G in bar 49, acting as the melodic climax as well. Let's take a quick listen. I've given the melody to both the piano and celesta. The celesta, to me, helps to add a magical quality, in keeping with the overall tone and feeling of the images that the music is accompanying. When adding a melody to the piano, you'll also probably need to tweak your previous piano patterns in order to write a part that is more natural for a piano player, or indeed just to have some separation or clarity between a melodic part and accompanying pattern. Here you can see I've tweaked the pattern in the left hand compared to the previous 2 parts of the intro. I'm still making sure to include only the notes from each chord for the accompanying part, but the actual patterns are slightly modified to ensure the melody and accompaniment are clearly separated. So let's take a listen. In order to give a feeling of development to these next two sections, you could add some extra layers to the instrumentation. To enhance the warm, emotional and magical tone that the music is ideally portraying, adding some long strings could be an effective choice. Here is an example of some string writing which could work for this style of track. Making use of the violins and violas, for the A section there are just sustained notes playing some of the pitches found in each triad. I'm a big fan of using pedal notes in these types of tracks. Held notes which largely stay static, while the underlying harmony changes. Here you can see I have both a high and low C running through from bars 33 to 51. C is, of course, found in C major, F major and A minor, so the pedal notes help to add a unifying glue throughout each of the chord changes. The inner part is then either playing a fifth or occasionally a third, such as in bars 46 to 49 here. I've also got a few sample libraries layered together here. The first violins from Benjamin Wallfisch strings, then an ensemble patch from Pacific strings, along with a flautando strings ensemble patch from Spitfire chamber strings. These two ensemble patches are both covering the violin and viola range. The flautandos, one of my favourite patches, helps to give a softer and more delicate sound than a normal sustained string patch. During the B section, to further help add a feeling of development, you could then introduce some string writing that has a little more movement, like I have here. Again, mostly using notes from each chord, you can introduce string lines which offer some more obvious shape or direction. For example, here you can see the line rising up, heading towards the end of the section. Again, I've also layered a few string libraries together. The Ben Wallfisch first violins, Spitfire chamber strings first violin legato patch, with the addition of using a solo violin sample from Performance Sample's Pacific solo strings, for adding even more presence. In addition, the ensemble flautando string patch is continuing underneath, generally playing the notes from each triad in open voicings, and now also making use of the cello's range as well. Extending the range down helps to give a little more breadth, expanding the sound as the track builds to a climax. Finally, I've also added a subtle bass guitar, the classic bass patch from the Kontakt factory library. This helps to add a little more depth throughout the A and B sections. So if you've been following along creating your own piece, you should have a track which is an introduction, followed by an A and B section. Ideally, you want your music to follow a clear arc. For this track, the material has gradually expanded or grown as the music has progressed. I often like to end pieces like these in a more calm and sedate way. Given the instruments which have been used, stripping back to just say a sparse piano part could be a way to achieve this. So for an ending, you could try using some open voiced piano chords, again using the progression you've used elsewhere in the piece, along with possibly a restatement of part of your melody. Now's the time to think about how you ultimately want your piece to end as well. Do you want your music to feel resolved, or do you want your music to hang on the last notes, leaving the listener wanting more? I've decided to resolve at the end, so I've aimed for a perfect cadence of G major, or chord 5, to C major, chord 1, giving a feeling of the music arriving home. So let's take a listen to the whole track, along with a video of some stock footage that I've pulled together. So when creating these sparse piano and string tracks, it's very important to add movement and musicality to your samples. To check out some effective techniques in order to bring life to your samples, check out my video using dynamics with your virtual instruments. Thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below.